Welcome to Moments with Mac. My name is Mac Founder Muledi. We're going international now. Probably one of the most fortunate people in the world right now. When one starts a show, you normally start by taking baby steps. I think I'm running straight onto that 100-meter mark, and I feel like Usain Bolt at this moment because of the caliber of people that I get to sit with on the show. But I think that's what it was all about. It is about trying to find the creme de la creme, the very best of the best that we can learn from, that we can get educated from, and that we can be inspired by. And at this moment in time, I actually have goosebumps just thinking about the fact that I'm sitting, alongside Dr. Kostman, and he's on our shores. He's come all the way from the United States to spend some time with us. There's a lot that I can probably say about him. If I just read out his CV and told you who he is, we'd be gone with the 1 hour of the show. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. I'm going to just tell you that this is Dr. JT Kostman, but we're going to learn a little bit about where he started, where he is, what he's doing in South Africa, and what this means not only for him, but for his organization, his company, but for us even as a country. Dr. JT Kostman, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm privileged and honored to be here. Thank you.
One of the first and many guests of Moments with Mac.
I have been looking forward to it since I heard.
Dr. Kostman, I think...
And it's JT, by
yes,
the way.
we'll go with JT,
Please.
Right? JT, I'd like to start from the very beginning, because obviously many of our audiences might not have had an interaction with you, might not know who you are and where you come from, and they'll see the Dr. Kostman, but JT started somewhere, right? There were probably dusty streets that you ran on, neighborhoods where you used to get up to mischief, and games that you used to play as a young man. It didn't just start by you being JT Kostman.
In some ways, I wish it did, but in many ways, I'm glad it didn't. I had an atypical route to being where I am, and I credit that with being what enabled me to be where I am today. You know, I had a conversation with my wife. I've been married for 35 years, and far and away the most influential person in my life has been my wife. I wouldn't be where I am without her. It's no way I would be. Frankly, when she met me, I had an apartment with a mattress and my clothes under the bathroom sink, and I'd probably have a new mattress by now had I not met her. And so everything is attributable to her. But we were having a conversation one day, and we were watching television, and on the show we were watching, there was this man who was being tried for murder. And they were talking about his terrible childhood he had. Well, I had, and it's not a contest, but I had an interesting childhood. I was homeless. I lived on the streets of New York from the time I was 9. I went there after having been lit on fire by my parents for the 3rd time and being sold. And I thought this would be a safer environment for me. And so I commented to my wife that I am where I am in spite of my background. And she made the point to me very rightly, that's not true. You're here because of your background and because of the decisions you made consequent to that. And that conversation, old as I was, again changed my life. And it made me realize
I don't mean to interject.
Please.
9 years old, in the street, in New York.
Yeah.
It couldn't have been easy.
What
do you remember about those days?
This was the late 1960s, 1970s. New York was going through a particularly challenging time, and it was a struggle. It was. I won't dismiss it by saying it was easy, but I had created opportunities for myself, had a will to survive, and a will to not just survive but to thrive, to accept that my circumstances would not define me, and I did what I had to do. I lived in alleys and I lived in the subways, and I made it a point that I would never steal. I would never engage in criminal conduct. And so I worked, and I worked hard. And I found that I was recently interviewed and asked, what do I think is the secret to success? And in my humble opinion, the secret to success is sweat. It's a willingness to work darn hard for what you want.
What was your first job?
This is a little embarrassing, but it was running numbers for a bookie.
Yes.
In Midtown Manhattan. There were 2 bookies. mob guys at the time. And I can say that now because they're both dead. It's a very long time ago. And
It's a safe space.
Yeah, exactly. And Primo and Tommy too were the two bookies. And I ran numbers. I actually went into the buildings. Interestingly, one of the buildings I went into was the Time Life building. And I used to go around to the various desks and I would collect the betting slips from these people and I would give the payoffs. Well, that's a building where I ended up being a C-level executive and a member of the executive committee. And I was given this wonderful corner office and I rejected it because I wanted the office that looked over the alley that I used to sleep in when I was working for the bookies.
Wow.
And so it was this, continuous reminder of being a runner for bookies, working for Primo and Tommy too. Yeah.
But during that time when you were still obviously running the streets and doing that, how did you then end up? You start off as a fireman, right?
I actually started off as an emergency medical technician, and then I became a paramedic eventually. Yeah, I had, by the time I was 16, I had a little conversation with the bookies, and they sat me down and they told me I had shown some adroitness with math and some capacity to be able to. They thought I was smarter than I probably was, and my comparator group wasn't very wonderful. And so they told me, they sat me down literally on my 16th birthday, and they told me, if you don't leave New York, you will be dead or in prison for the rest of your life by the time you're 18. And so they ordered me out of New York. And when mob guys tell you to leave New York, you leave New York. And I left that room. I didn't go back to by now I had an apartment that I kept with a bunch of other street urchins. And I didn't go back to the apartment. I didn't pack. I did nothing but go to the highway as they instructed me. And I left and I headed west and I put out my thumb and headed for California from New York. Took me about 4 months. I got as far as Nevada, Las Vegas, as a matter of fact. And I just settled there. And I got a couple of jobs. I was washing dishes in the evening. I worked at a construction site. And then I put myself through training for a vocational rehabilitation center to learn this new trade in the late 1970s called computers. And I learned to not just program for computers, but my first job was as a computer. That was actually a job designation, and I became a computer. And computers were the poor souls who sat in the basement and crunched numbers and worked these horrible machines. And I was doing that, and I was miserable, frankly. I wasn't making very much money, and I was 17 years old, 16 years old. And one evening, when I was doing my night job, I was carrying out the slop bucket from where I was a busboy and a dishwasher, and I fell and I broke my arm very badly. In, I think it was 16 different places. And so now I couldn't go back to the dishwasher job. I couldn't go back to the computing job, and I couldn't go back to the construction job. And so I was bereft. And so now what do I do? Well, the state of Nevada graciously offered, if you took college courses, they would pay you an extra US 100 USD a month, which at the time was quite a bit of money. And so I enrolled in the college, and I took one course in psychology and one course to become an emergency medical technician. And so after the semester, after 6 months, my arm had healed. I was an EMT, and then I went to work in my first, I guess, job that I enjoyed as an emergency medical technician. And stuck with that job for a couple of months. And one day, my mentor, who when I wasn't working, just transporting patients to hospitals, I would go on the emergency rescue ambulance with this paramedic. Jay Levinson was his name. And he was formerly from New York also, and street kid from New York. And so he gave me a break. I rode along with him. One day he tells me as I come into work to get in the ambulance, the real ambulance, with the lights and the sirens. I was so excited. I thought I'd been promoted. Nobody told me. And he puts on the lights and the sirens, and he asked me to get up front. And that was the best day of my life, frankly, for 3 minutes and 45 seconds, which is how long it took us to end up in front of the MGM Grand Hotel, which was on fire. And at the time, it was the largest structure fire in American history. 88 people lost their lives. Jay was the first paramedic in. He took medical charge of the scene. We treated over 350 patients. Subsequent to the fire, we did the recon and we removed 86 out of the 88 souls who perished in the fire. And because of that, the city of Las Vegas, the state of Nevada, sent me to paramedic school. And that's sort of where the journey really began.
As I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you, JT, and I think of that 9-year-old boy that was set on fire a couple of times, thrown out into the street.
I think they thought I looked cold, by the way. I think
you thought they were warming you up.
Exactly. All well intentioned.
And I look at all of these steps and everything that is happening. One would have thought you would have become a selfish person, a self-serving person, but you changed your entire trajectory and said, I actually want to help people. Is that something that happened consciously?
That's true. I don't know that I changed my trajectory. I think that set my trajectory.
Yes.
I think that was the point my wife was making, was I made if it wasn't a deliberative, conscious decision, a decision was made at that point. I had a decision to decide to be just for myself or to try my best to protect others, right? And I decided, instead of becoming a jackal, to become a sheepdog, to become someone who protects others. And that set the course of the rest of my life, was that decision to, and I became an EMT, I like to believe, not just because it was exciting, not just because it was interesting, though it certainly was.
Yes.
And I was young at the time, so I'm sure that was a great influence. But the notion that I could actually save other people, that other people might not have to endure some of what I did, that I could be the one who would come to the rescue, that I could be the one I always wished for, lying in the dark hours and wishing someone would come and rescue me. Who is that obligation fall to, right? Exactly that person. You can live your life as a victim or as a hero. You can either be the one who calls out for help, or you can be the one who says, I'm going to help and I'm going to do. And I made a very, I think, conscious decision at that time that I am not going to be a victim of circumstance, of other people, of the economy, of whatever else it was. I was going to affirmatively do something to try to give back. And that's what made me an EMT. That's certainly what took me into being a paramedic. Subsequent to that, I think it was a driving force in really most other decisions I made through the course of my life up to today.
I think there's an incredible lesson that needs to be learned from that. To give a bit of context, in South Africa, we've been liberated, and we were liberated in 1994. We were given opportunities that most people, don't have. Our country changed for the better. Yet there's a lot of youth, there's a lot of young people, and I think even in the US, you might have the thing where young people feel entitled.
Yes.
How do we change that? How do we change that mindset to being a mindset of, I want to be the helper and not the one that has been helped, or where is my help and I feel that I'm entitled to that help?
It's very interesting we're having this conversation, because one of the great influences for me through certainly my adult life, and I think even the later part of my childhood, was Mandela. And Mandela, it's almost ingrained in me, said, don't judge me by my successes, judge me by the number of times I fell down and got back up, right? And I think that's really the definition. I think too many, and let me caveat by saying, I think every generation says, well, those kids, and that younger generation, right? And they don't have the same respect, and they don't treat, and that's nonsense. I think our parents said that about us, our parents said that about them. And so when I look at the young generation, I say, thank heaven. When I look at my children, who are grown, my youngest is 30, my grandchildren even, when I look at them, I think, thank heaven they didn't suffer. But part of me also says, did I take that away from them, right? Does part of what shapes our character and our abilities and who we become as people is that struggle? And so what I would say to the kids is, rather than saying, shame on you, or take advantage of, or appreciate those things, I would say revel in it. I would say to yourself that these struggles that you go through, even if and it's not a contest, right? They're not supposed to. My kids are not supposed to say, well, gee, I'm not like Dad. I never got lit on fire or sold into slavery, so I guess I have it easy. No, their struggles are legitimate. Their challenges are legitimate. They're real. We're talking right now in an age where children are not allowed out, who are 20, 25 years old, to party after 10 p.m., I have to tell you, that would have been quite oppressive when we were 20, 25 years old, and my heart goes to them. It does. That's a consequence of COVID. It's a consequence of circumstance. Nothing can be helped. We shouldn't say, well, then shame on you for declaiming that. Shame on you for pitying yourself about that. No. Say to yourself, this sucks. This is terrible. I wish it could be better. It can't. But what am I going to do with this?
Yes.
What am I going to say? And you know what? If I can't go out after 10 p.m., what am I going to do to improve upon my life? What am I going to do to say, whether I succeed or fail in my life, ultimately, it's up to me. I have responsibility for that. I have agency, right? Whether I succeed or fail, ultimately, who I am to be is up to me. And I think increasingly I'm hopeful that the younger generation will start to embrace more of that. And I think they will. I think we will, I'm of a generation beyond yours, but I think both of our generations will be shocked and I think very positively affirmed when we see what becomes of this generation. I have all hopes for them. They're smarter than we are, frankly. They have, yes, more opportunity than we have, but I think many of them are cognizant of it. I think some of them are saying to themselves, and taking some of that for granted, taking that for advantage, but I think we overstate that when we're talking about that. I think we have to give a little credit to the kids and realize that our parents probably said that about us.
I'm going to take it a little bit back and go to where you then joined law enforcement agencies. Yeah. I mean, you went from saving people to chasing people, right? And
well, although let me say, in all fairness, I fell for the line.
Yes.
When I became a cop, it was at the time in the United States where we created this project called community-oriented policing.
Yes.
And the idea was to change the very fundamental nature of policing. Rather than being law enforcement, it was an enablement of the community and supporting the community. I found that to be not true, which is why I left law enforcement. And I had some experiences in law enforcement that frankly sickened me, and that's why I left. The overt racism, the discrimination, the treatment of people in ways that, as a consequence of their economic circumstance or whomever they were, that I found repugnant. But I joined law enforcement very specifically because I thought I could make a difference. I'll tell you very briefly, I had my trainer, my mentor as a cop, he taught me a program that he had that I inherited. And everyone referred to it as JT's kids. And JT's kids were, I would find kids engaged in, let's just say, naughty conduct, right? It wasn't horrible. They weren't murdering people. They weren't, doing terrible things. They were breaking into parking meters, or they were stealing newspapers, or stupid things like that. Well, if I caught one of these kids, rather than arrest them and put the permanent marker on them, I told them, you have a choice. I can take you to jail, which I absolutely can, or here's what we're going to do. I'm going to meet with you once a week. I'm going to meet your parents. You are going to engage in some extracurricular activity, sport, the chess club, I don't care. You'll have something, and we will stay in touch, and we will stay friends. And I did, and I would do that for months and years with some of these kids. And part of what made me leave the police department was I was sanctioned for it. I was told, you're not a social worker, you're not there, you're there to make arrests, which I thought was absurd. Let me, if you will, I'll fast forward on that. My wife and I, this is probably 15 years after I had left the police force, many years later, we go to have the oil changed on our car and some automotive repairs done. As I'm sitting there in the bay, the mechanic comes out and hugs me, and I'm thinking, what the heck is this about? He was one of those kids.
Wow.
And he told me he was headed for the life that he probably would likely have led, but for. And I'll tell you, I don't know if I ever helped any other kid, made it all worth it. That was the lesson I took away from that. And that's, frankly, that's why I went into being a cop. So just to dispel the notion, it was still about trying to protect other people, trying to help other people, is what drove me to being a cop, but it's also what drove me away from being a cop. And it's why I left law enforcement, was because I found my colleagues, my peers, didn't necessarily embrace that same perspective.
the passion, the love, and the spark that ignited IT, that ignited you being fascinated with computers. When did that happen?
I've always liked solving puzzles. When I was a homeless kid, when I was 9, I took refuge in the New York Public Library. You've seen the pictures of it. It's the one with the lions out front on 42nd Street, New York. And
The one that Rocky runs up.
no, that's Philadelphia. Come on, man. We're New York. We're better than that. Come on, man. No, but I would hide in the library because it was a warm, dry, safe space, and the librarians were lovely. And I had 2 passions. I loved Sherlock Holmes, and I would read all Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's works back to back, and that's what gave me a love of solving puzzles and riddles. And the math puzzler, Martin Gardner, who would write a column in Scientific American. And I developed this love of solving puzzles.
Yes.
And that's what IT really is. People think of IT as being about the machines and the computers, but they're not. They're math. And that's really what I developed an early love of, was an early love of mathematics. It turned out, from working with the bookies, I had a knack for it. I have some capacity for math, and I found that treating math as a game and evolving that, and then having computers that could be able to help me do higher ordinal, higher level math, which is something I carried with me, by the way. Even when I was an EMT and paramedic, I was the one who put those services, the emergency medical services, into computer databases. And this was in the late 70s, early 80s, before those things really existed. And then when I was in the police force, working with computer enabling some of these systems. And then even when I went the police force, when I went to the military, doing that same sort of work. And so that's been a continuous theme through my life, is this intersection of computers, math, and most importantly, solving cool puzzles and riddles. And that's what gives me the joy.
When you got involved with the military, do you think that the discipline, for one, the patriotism and that sense of giving of yourself to your country, changed your thinking as a human being and your selflessness?
You know, I don't know. Well, I appreciate you saying it. I don't know that I'm as. It's hard for me to think of myself as selfless. I've been married to a woman for 35 years who has been an intensive care unit nurse for 40 years. And so it's very hard to consider yourself selfless living in my house. My son was an international photojournalist for years who traveled around and living in populations he thought he could help. He most notably, he lived in an orphanage in Nepal to talk about the plight of these children. My daughter teaches special needs education. I'm the least selfless one in my house, far and away. My family are extraordinary. But that said, thank you for asking. What the military really gave me was a recognition of being a part of something that was bigger than myself, right? I think too many of us get mired in this notion of the world sort of revolves around me, that I'm the star of the movie and there are extras in the movie of my life. And the military dispels that. Very fortunately for me, I wasn't an ordinary soldier in any capacity, but I was recruited into the United States Special Forces. And the Special Forces have a very different mission. They're not about, a bunch of soldiers all in a line and doing, they're about working with indigenous populations. They're about working with insurgencies. The motto of the Special Forces is De Oppresso Liber, which is Latin for the liberation of the oppressed. And so we went around the world helping to liberate oppressed populations. And so it was very consistent, very constant with my ethos. And so it gave me a sense of, I'm not the only one who's out there to protect other people. I'm part of, at the time, just a brotherhood, but a fraternity, a community that has the dedication to that mission. And so my experience of the military was very positive in that regard. And it sort of extended my experiences of this desire to help, this desire to give back, this desire to be a part of something. I'm also, as you know, I'm a professor, and I've been on faculty at several universities. And one of the points I love to make to my students, whether they're the psychology students, the MBA students, or the data science students, is we all took that Psych 101 course where they talked about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Right. What did he have at the top? He had this notion of self-actualization. I think he blew it. I think he got it wrong. I think that's not the pinnacle. The pinnacle is being a part of something bigger than yourself, right? I think very rightly, you asked me about my sense of patriotism. There's an unfortunate bias now to talk about nationalism. Nationalism, I think, is very different. Nationalism is this bias, this discrimination, this prejudice of thinking your country
is better than
anyone else. And you, as a consequence, are better than others because you're a part of that country. Nonsense. Nonsense, I say. There's nothing wrong with patriotism. Patriotism is a wonderful thing. I think believing that your country is gives you opportunity, gives you a chance to participate, to belong, to be a part of a community is wonderful. I think one of the great battles of the current era is battling that notion of patriotism versus nationalism.
Yes.
This opportunity to think of ourselves as self. And so as much as I'm deeply proud to be an American, I think of myself as being part of a larger and a different community, right? A community of people who believe in giving something back, in protecting others, in doing the right thing. And that's more how I define myself, far and away than nationalistic tendencies. Patriotic tendencies, certainly, but a citizen of the world.
You've worked in some of the top, some of the best Fortune 50 companies all around the world. You've done incredible work out in India where you've trained, thousands of people in analytics, data analysis, artificial intelligence, machine learning. How much of an impact would you say technology has or can change the lives of people?
Oh.
And what does it mean to you?
Well, look at India as an example. India inarguably, indisputably changed India, the entire country. The subcontinent was unalterably changed forever, its trajectory, as a consequence of the introduction of technology. Not just the utilization of technology, which, as a side note, there's a lot of fear-mongering about the rise of AI and the rise of the robots. Nonsense.
They're coming to take over, aren't they?
Oh, please. I tell people in the US, the only danger the robots pose is if Arnold Schwarzenegger ever becomes governor again. But other than that...
The governator.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's absurd. We are, I actually wrote a quasi-poem once as a challenge from one of my other professor friends, and I talked about the fact that we are the species that augments, from eyeglasses to iPads, from pencils to prosthetics. We are a species that doesn't exist particularly well without technology. Technology is meant to augment us. It's to make us more fully human. That's what AI and machine learning do. I think it was well-intentioned, but my peers, the press, professional organizations have labeled me the world's leading thinker in applied artificial intelligence. And it makes me laugh every time because I realize I don't work in artificial intelligence. I work in intelligence augmentation. I work in using these capacities to be able to evolve our capacities. And so you go back to India, how did it change the world? How did it change the subcontinent? But the opportunities it conferred to people, the ability to be able to rise yourself from poverty and to be able to do something meaningful and remunerative. I still maintain groups in India, and I'm paying for the work ethic. I'm paying for the ethos that people bring to the stage. One of the mantras of our company is ability is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so we try to regulate that. And we say, why not globalize opportunity? But that said, and the part of your question that you didn't ask that I should speak to is, I didn't actually bring AI and machine learning to India. I brought the past generation of technology to India. The current generation of AI and machine learning, I think, will exist in South Africa. I think South Africa is going to become the home. South Africa is going to be, to AI, to machine learning, to data science, to these capabilities, what India was to the past generation. And I think that for a number of reasons, not the least of which is the political environment, the economic environment, the degree of liberality, frankly, the caliber of education that you have. University of Johannesburg, some of the other universities you have here are astounding. Some of the professors you have are quite literally world class. I follow their work continuously. And I think the public-private partnership and that notion that we can rise opportunity, that's candidly why my company has decided to not just engage itself in South Africa, but we are increasingly moving more and more of our operations to South Africa because we see a population that's everything we look for. We look for, forgive me, but kids. To me, anyone under 40 is a kid. I'm old. But we look for kids who are brilliant, of course, and I think that's typically unrecognized. But almost more importantly, we look for kids who have a great work ethic, who are willing to sweat, right? Who are willing to work hard. I think that's the number one key to being successful and to being able to work as part of a collaborative effort. And I see those things when I look at the candidates, the prospects, the people who I talk to about potentially putting to work here. One of our primary goals in South Africa is, and I don't think it's altruistic, it's to change the nature of opportunity in South Africa toward that end, to create these opportunities. And, and I say that also, by the way, you mentioned I've been a C-level executive at 2 Fortune 50 companies, Samsung and Time Inc. I say that selfishly, having sat in those seats. We can't afford the current cadre of data scientists, of AI engineers, of analysts that we have in the US. You talk about expectations. You talk about being a little bit spoiled. And one of the positive consequences of COVID, and COVID is a catalyst of positive change, is we've realized that distance is immaterial. Forgive me, it's an honorific to be called a geek doing what I do. I'm a geek. I'm actually an AI super geek. But the geeks I work with, I don't typically encounter them face to face, even if they work in the same building. Why? Because they don't have the time for it, and they don't have the inclination for it. So what do I care if they're in Soweto? What do I care if they're in Joburg? What do I care if they're in Cape Town? I don't care. I have teams that are in Hyderabad, in India, in Chennai, and all over the world, in South America, in Europe. Doesn't matter. They're still doing the work.
My question would then be, as you said, you don't want to be altruistic, right? When you look at this, but the opportunity in South Africa, not only for you as a company or as a business, but for that individual child that is sitting in Soweto, that child in Mpumalanga, in Umlazi, wherever it is that they could be sitting, how could your products, your services, or the knowledge that you would want to impart, how can that change their lives?
Yeah, well, I think in multiple ways. I think most prominently, all the engagements we're currently involved in South Africa are to what I refer to as fight the good fight. We're about fighting fraud, waste, corruption, and abuse. We're about ensuring the equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. We're about creating hopefully a more egalitarian society. That's all the work we're doing currently. Will we eventually veer more into the commercial sector? Of course we will, but that's okay, right? If we can help McDonald's be more successful and create more opportunity and more work opportunities for people, if we can help multinationals find South Africa as a more attractive destination, all the better for the economy, all the better for those opportunities. And I think the secondary level of that is, for us, we have to create engaging work for employees who, one of my greatest perverse joys in life are employees who leave us for higher paying opportunities. I pay market wage. I absolutely celebrate it and love it when kids who I found who come from the gutters as I did tell me, I'm so sorry, but the extraordinary amount you're paying me isn't enough. And I'm getting an offer from Amazon or Google, and they're going to pay me even more. Good for you. Good for you, and stay in touch. I have employees who have worked for me for literally 15, 17 years, are some of my most seniors. But you'll find with them at 3 years, I start trying to push them a little bit out of the nest and tell them, if you can do better, if you can better yourself, that's the obligation you have, is to take care of yourself. But hopefully you'll bring the ethos with you.
Is that what you're trying to do for South Africa?
I think that's what I'm trying to pay back to the world and the kindness that it bestowed on me and the opportunity it gave me. South Africa, absolutely, because I have an affinity. I told you, one of my influences from a young age was Mandela. It's frankly my first visit to South Africa. This has been one of my destination must lists for years now, and the opportunity to be here and to be able to contribute to this society that has, what South Africa has done is a miracle, quite frankly. During my adult life, not even during my life, during my adult life, I remember the end of apartheid as if it was yesterday. When you get to a certain age, right, time starts to be incongruous. And so when I look back to the 90s, and I remember, and by the way, that's when I was in Special Forces, and we were fighting for the liberation of the oppressed. And so we were rooting for this from the sidelines, and we were saying, and there you go. And now I didn't get to be a part of the struggle, but to be any small part of the resurrection, any small part of the opportunity. I'll be a little more disclosive to you than I probably should be. When I was in Special Forces,
Yes.
I was part of a unit that was killed. We all were. And we were declared killed in action. And we resurrected. We came back from the mission. And we all had tattoos emblazoned on our arms of a phoenix. And I have this whole side of my arm is a phoenix rising from the ashes. That's what I see when I see South Africa.
That's absolutely unbelievable. You formed a company called Protected by AI. One, what does the name mean, and what do you hope to achieve with Protected by AI?
Yeah, thank you. It means just that. I give all credit to my business partner. My business partner is a fellow by the name of Brian Gallagher. I think you'll be speaking to him hopefully soon. Brian is former United States Secret Service. He protected presidents and vice presidents and diplomats. Prior to that, he actually started as a paramedic as well, just as I did. Prior to that, he started out homeless. He and his family living effectively in the basement of a relative's apartment when his parents went bankrupt. And so we have a lot of background in common. We met a very, Hollywood moment. I'll be happy to tell you about it sometime. It's been declassified, where we saved the life of a president. And
You've got to share that with us. There's no way that you cannot share that with us.
It really is. It's a great story. And I can't believe they let us talk about it now, but they do. And many years after that, in fact, only 2 years ago, I'd lost touch with Brian, and he called me up. And at the time I was retired, and I was sitting on boards, and he said, "You must be bored sitting on boards. How'd you like to come back one more time and try to save the world?" And he got me. And he said, we're going to form a company. Here's our mission. We are going to protect people, property, places, and profits, because people's financial well-being is almost as important as their well-being in general. Brilliant. And we formed this company. Our motto is peace of mind through superior technology. And so how do we use the capabilities that aren't available to most entities, most organizations? I'm not talking about just the small companies, but even governments. When I'm in conversations with other governments around the world, I work with the U.S. intelligence, defense, and security agencies, as I'm sure you know, and I built many of their capabilities. I had a budget that was incomprehensible in all of those capacities. Most people can't afford that. And so our mission became about how do we build slingshots to arm David to fight the Goliathan forces they face? And how do we take what we've already built, what we've already established, and take that and confer those same advantages to others? That's what our company became about. And that was the meaning behind Protected by .ai is our website and the name of the company. And we formed as a separate entity, Protected by AI Africa. And by the way, we very purposely didn't call it Protected by AI South Africa, because we thought we had an obligation not just to the country, but to the continent. And if we could help evolve people's capacities, their opportunities, that shouldn't be predicated just on where we had immediate opportunity, but to a larger environment. And so, that's what sort of named us and brought us here.
So there's two things that I'm going to hold you to, right? The first one is the story of how you and Brian met long time ago. But the second one is that there's also a very important person that sits on your board of governors at Protected by AI. This is Governor O'Malley. Yes. And he's got an incredible story to tell. In South Africa, when you look at municipalities and various spheres of government, the issue of corruption, when you look at what is happening in some of our municipalities in in terms of them being derelict, abuse of money, and various other things that happen.
Yeah.
And you look at someone like Governor O'Malley, who turned around an entire state. How did you do it? How can we take those lessons and bring them back home here? Because a lot of us are tired of corruption, and we'd like to see an impact and a change happening in our country.
You know, I'll tell you, Martin O'Malley, Governor O'Malley, is, I'm honored and so proud to say, a personal friend. And he was a personal friend before we asked him to serve in this capacity on our Board of Advisors. And we take, by the way, our Board of Advisors very seriously. We have them there as our conscience, if you will. They're the ones who hold us accountable to ourselves. As much as Brian and I are hard on ourselves, we decided to have this additional layer who were better men and women than we are. And Governor O'Malley certainly qualifies. In fact, he was the first person we invited to our board. Governor O'Malley, going back his story, he was working as a defense lawyer in the city of Baltimore, which at the time, and you probably don't track U.S. news back to that era, but at the time it was, by all objective measures, the worst city in America. Highest crime rate, highest murder rate, highest rate of drug and alcohol addiction, homelessness, dropouts from high school.
Did you say Joburg or did you say Baltimore?
I think it was. Well, and let me tell you, it also had the largest black population of any major city in the United States. Governor O'Malley is as white as I am, if that's possible. And he was running against two other candidates who were black for mayor. And he made a promise and a commitment to the community that if I'm elected, here's exactly what I will do. You hold me accountable, and if I don't fulfill this promise, boot me, kick me out. And what he did was he brought a data-driven approach. He created accountabilities.
Wow.
And he said to the head of every major department, police department, fire department, but also sanitation, the road work crews, the Department of Education, everyone in the city, he said, here's what I want you to do. Every Monday, I think it was, every Monday for 20 minutes, and we will slot you through the day so you don't have to spend your whole day. If you're the chief of police, 9 to 9:20 is your time slot. The fire chief, 9:20 to 9:40 is your time slot. No overlap, done. You will come in and you'll report to us on certain key metrics. And he borrowed from a notion that had been developed in New York by a guy named Bill Bratton in New York on what was called CompStat, to measure crime. But here's where O'Malley was brilliant. And he said, I don't want you to tell me the typical measurements of crime. I don't want you to be able to tell me, here's how many arrests we made. Why? Because the cops would go out and game the system. They'd go out and just arrest a bunch of people. No. He said, I want you to look at real outcomes we're interested in. How were homicide rates and how did they decline? How were break-ins and how did they decline? How were these things that mattered? How many cops were found to be engaged in corrupt activities? How did that? Those sorts of things is what he looked for. But he did the same thing with rather mundane pedestrian areas. One of my favorite examples of his was one of the biggest challenges most mayors deal with is potholes, believe it or not.
Yes.
And by the way, the roads in Johannesburg are fantastic compared to the roads in New York and most cities. I have to tell you, in the U.S., we're envious of your infrastructure. Oh my goodness! But around my home, I can't wait to tell my wife how much better the roads are here. But he would measure from the time an initial complaint was filed on a pothole, how long did it take to fill it and resolve the complaint entirely? And he held him to a standard of 48 hours. From the time someone said, hey man, I have a pothole in front of my house or on my way to work, filled in 48 hours. And he then was able to make that a promise, that he went out and advertised and said, we're going to make you a promise and hold us accountable. And he held news conferences where literally the news reporters would say, hey man, we showed that you had 200 potholes and only 98% of them were filled within 48 hours. He said, all right, our apologies. What about the other 2%? Okay, they were filled within 72 hours. Okay, we'll do better. But pretty darn good, which by the way, very smart politician, right? And so getting the credit for doing the things that people care about. Well, he was so successful in this, they elevated him to governor. And so as governor, he took exactly that same perspective and said, we can lead through smart government, through a data-driven approach to government. And in fact, he wrote a book to that effect that I'll be happy to share a copy with you, where he talks about how government to succeed, but not anecdotally, not by telling stories and by trying to con and convince the public, but what the public wants is action and proof, right? Don't tell us you're going to make our life better. Do it and prove it. Show it to us. That's what O'Malley's entire platform was predicated on. We, as a company, took that thinking and brought it into reality. And so what we said was, if he could do that for Maryland, for Baltimore, and for Maryland, why can't it be done anywhere else? And in partnership with Martin O'Malley, that's some of the thinking we're hoping to bring to South Africa.
Right. So now I'm going to hold you accountable to another thing, right? Tell us how you and Brian met, and that's how we'll end Moments of Mac, because I think it's such a beautiful story, and really speaks about the importance of what we're trying to do here from a data analytics point of view, from a machine learning point of view, augmented artificial intelligence, as well as seeing the power of technology changing lives and even saving lives. And I think for me that's something that is quite important, because being the CEO of Protected by AI Africa, I think that is a promise that I would also like to make, not only to my country, but people and businesses and the private sector and the public sector that you're going to be interacting with.
Brilliant. Well, just so you know, this is what we typically refer to as a two-scotch story. So I'm going to tell this with just a glass of water. So we'll see how I do. But I had built a capability to be able to monitor social media for threats. And before anyone thinks that's big brotherish, I think we all know corporate America does that, and the corporate world does that every day. And I don't consider that to be a negative, by the way. And forgive me the minor segue, but I'm old enough to remember a time before major grocery stores. And we had the little grocerette on the corner that was owned by a guy named Henry. And Henry knew me. And he knew what candy bar I liked. He knew what cereal I enjoyed. He knew what pop I liked. We used to call that respect. We used to call that customer service and caring.
Yes.
The world has gotten so large, we can't do that. At its best, that's what social media analysis is about. That is certainly the work I did eventually for the Obama campaign. And I led, as you know, the analysis and the strategy for the 2012 Obama campaign. President Obama wanted to truly hear his constituency and hear what they were concerned about. He wasn't looking to manipulate a message. He was looking to listen. And I think it's from that degree of respect. That said, I don't know if we had quite that degree of respect, but when I built these capabilities for the U.S. intelligence and security entities, and I was working at the time for several of these three-letter agencies in the United States, one of them was the FBI, in addition to CIA, DIA, and some of these other groups. What we wanted to do was listen to the world for threats, real, credible, meaningful threats. And this was in 2010. So this is when social media is starting to explode, if not starting to flourish. And so I built this capability that listened to the social media multiverse. It listened to literally all the world's conversations that were occurring, by the way, in the open space.
Yes.
Right? So we were not sneaking and creeping and peeping. We were listening to conversations people were having in the public square, the cyber square. And we were listening for, were there real threats that we should be concerned about? Well, my team built these capabilities. I shouldn't take credit for it. I always hire people who are smarter than I am. And so these kids who were working for me, we built these capabilities to monitor the world, and we had all the bugs run out, and we had the system ready on a Friday, but it was not until 10 p.m. on Friday.
Yes.
We had the system, and we decided we're going to launch it Monday morning. And so uncharacteristically, I took the weekend off. And so Saturday, I slept in late, which I never did. Sunday, I decided I was going to have brunch with some friends, and I'm in the parking lot having brunch, and my phone that's dedicated to this capacity explodes. They've built in klaxons and haptic response and the buzzing and the vibrating, and it's going mad. And it says there's a credible threat to the President of the United States, to POTUS. And I was furious. I picked up my other phone and I called my team and I said, hey, I'm trying to get some brunch, no games, right? This is not a time for a test. And they said, we're not in the office. This is the system, this is live, this is real.
This is the system you've built.
Yeah. And
this is your fault.
So now, torn between two phones, I'm yelling at my team on the other hand, and I never get angry at my team, and I'm looking at the phone, and sure enough. And so Now we've burned a few seconds, and so I hang up with them and I call the FBI, my liaison, and I called my liaison to the FBI and I tell him, hey man, I've got a credible threat to the president. Stand by, I'm going to patch you through to the Secret Service, he says. Patches me through to the Secret Service. Tell them, here's what I have. The president is currently attending the APEC conference, the Asia Pacific Economic Council conference in Hawaii. He's in Hawaii right now. There's a guy who is hell-bent on killing him. What do we do? Stand by, and he patches me through to Hawaii, to the office, the field office that's coordinating security there. The agent picks up and I tell him, the guy says he has explosives and all the weapons. Stand by. He gives me the other guy. And the other guy is the guy who's in charge of explosives and terrible things. And the guy who's in charge of explosives and terrible things, I tell him what I have, and he says he's armed to the teeth, and he has IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and other weapons, and all this. What do we do? Stand by, he tells me, and he puts the phone down. He doesn't put me on hold, and I hear him coordinating and talking to the teams. I remember I'm former Special Forces, former cop, so I'm getting pretty jazzed about this. And stand by, 6 minutes after that call, 8 minutes in total, people are kicking down the door. They find the guy buck naked, armed to the teeth,
Wow.
explosives everywhere. It's serious. They take him into custody, and he gets back on the phone, and he tells me, okay, we've got the guy, all is safe. The guy I was on the phone with is now my business partner, Brian Gallagher.
And those are the
And
partners.
that's how we met. Brian likes to tell the other end of the story that I never tell, which is, as reward for that, he got 3 weeks additional duty staying in Hawaii, cleaning up the mess, and he had to just stay there doing this miserable duty. I had beers with Obama at the White House. He still holds it against me. And so, yeah, Brian called me years later, as he tells the tale, when he was looking to start our new enterprise protected by AI, he was Googling and he was looking for who's the world's leading thinker in applied artificial intelligence. And he said, hey, I know that guy. And yeah, that's when he called me and we went to work.
You saved the President of the United States.
Well, Brian did.
Well, you
Actually,
and Brian
Brian
together
says
in your systems.
he wore sunglasses and suits. It was the younger kids who saved the president.
And you know, one of the biggest things that I'm obviously going to take from this is the fact that these capabilities, these systems, all of this work that you have done in your various roles and in your various positions is now coming to Africa. It gives me goosebumps to think that, number one, I'm sitting next to you. Number two, all of this has now been brought into our country, and hopefully, like you saved President Barack Obama, you might just be able to save our country. Thank you so much, Dr. J.T. Kostman. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you with me. You've broken the mold of Moments with Mac, and I think if the show ends today, it's fine. It can end off with this interview. But thank you very much. I'm truly humbled.
As am I. Thank you, sir. It's been an honor.
Well, that was Moments with Mac. No better way that we can end off the show with none other than such an incredible human being, Dr. J.T. Kostman, one of the founders of Protected by AI, a company I'm really proud to be involved with. But more than that, it might be coming to your home. This was Moments with Mac.